My aunt promised to handle the complicated estate filings for my late mother, assuring me my siblings and I would get our rightful share. Weeks later, she produced a revised will, showing the majority of the estate was transferred to her charitable foundation. I called her sobbing, saying I fully trusted her and needed a quiet day off to grieve, leaving her alone in the estate office. What she didn't see was the small voice-activated recorder I hid inside the hollowed-out base of the antique desk lamp she always used. My mother Eleanor passed away 3 months ago. The loss was crippling enough, but the subsequent financial chaos was becoming a second grief. The core of the estate was her large historic home in Boston and a portfolio of investments intended to be split equally among my two siblings, David and Chloe, and me, James. Into this void stepped my Aunt Vivian. Vivian, mother's older sister, had always projected an air of benevolent superiority. She runs a mid-sized, perpetually underfunded charitable foundation and has always viewed our family's wealth as something better spent under her stewardship. She volunteered immediately to handle the estate filings. "Don't worry your heads about it, dears," Vivian had told us, patting my hand with a cold, dry touch. "Estate law is complicated. I'll handle the paperwork. You three will get your rightful share." We trusted her. She was family. We were wrong. The revised document. Last week, Vivian called us to the estate office, Mother's old study, for a formal update. She sat behind the antique mahogany desk, the room dominated by the heavy, ornate desk lamp she always insisted on using even in daylight. She presented us with a thick packet of documents. "I finished the probate filing," she announced, her voice professionally solemn. "There was a small revision Mother made shortly before she passed." The revision wasn't small. It was catastrophic. The newly produced will showed that while David and Chloe were granted token cash gifts, the vast majority of the estate, the Boston home, and the investment portfolio was to be transferred to the Vivian Vance Charitable Foundation. The entire estate, our inheritance, was gone. "Mother always had a deep commitment to philanthropy," Vivian stated, ignoring the tears welling in Chloe's eyes. "She saw the greater good. My foundation will honor her legacy." The confrontation and retreat. We were furious but helpless. We couldn't prove the will was forged, and Vivian had already initiated the probate process, moving with unnerving speed. I met Vivian's gaze across the desk. I knew I couldn't confront her legally yet. She had the documents. I had nothing but suspicion. I had to buy time and get her to drop her guard. I stood up, performing the role of the broken, naive nephew. I began to sob loudly, covering my face with my hands. "Aunt Vivian, I just can't," I choked out, letting my voice crack with despair. "I trusted you completely. I fully trust you. This is too much. I can't look at this paperwork right now." I sniffled dramatically. "I need to take a quiet day off tomorrow. Just a day to grieve away from the lawyers and the paperwork. I need you to just handle things here." I made sure I emphasized the word trusted, reinforcing her belief that I was mentally broken and completely out of the fight. Vivian rushed around the desk, a faint look of relief, mixed with synthetic concern on her face. "Of course, James, you take the day. I'll be here. I'll get all this complicated paperwork sorted." The hidden witness. As I rushed out of the study, supposedly collapsing under the weight of grief, my plan was already set. 2 days prior, after the initial shock of the revised will, I had returned to the estate office late at night, letting myself in with Mother's spare key. My target was the antique desk lamp. The lamp was massive with a bronze base. I carefully disassembled it and, using a precision drill, hollowed out a small cavity in the heavy base. Inside, I secured a state-of-the-art voice-activated digital recorder. The microphone was tiny, pointed upward through a minute gap in the metalwork. The lamp was always on, always close to where Vivian worked. Any private phone call, any consultation with her lawyer, any internal monologue spoken over the paperwork would all be captured. I left the office that night, locking the door behind me. I had given Vivian the perfect opportunity: an empty office, total control over the estate documents, and the belief that the rightful heirs were too emotionally incapacitated to fight back. She thought she was alone with her secrets and her prize, but the antique desk lamp she relied on was now a silent, illuminated witness waiting for her to incriminate herself. The moment I closed the heavy oak door to the estate office, I was out of character. I didn't collapse into despair. I drove straight to the nearest quiet cafe, purchased a strong coffee, and waited for the phone call from my private, untraceable line. I was expecting a call from Marcus Thorne, my long-term attorney, whom I had secretly briefed on the situation hours before confronting Vivian. I needed him ready to act the moment I had proof. The silent wait. I spent the whole day forcing myself to believe in my own feigned ignorance. I had to assume Vivian would be cautious, perhaps waiting until nightfall, but she was greedy, and she was on a timeline. The will needed to be formally accepted by the probate court before any of us could mount a legal challenge. She would want to consolidate her victory. Around 4:10 p.m., my burner phone buzzed with an encrypted message from my contact, the tech expert who had helped me install the tiny voice recorder. Code download triggered. The recorder was programmed to silently dump its encrypted audio file onto a secure cloud server the moment it detected an active Wi-Fi network near the antique desk lamp. Vivian, in her arrogance, had connected her personal laptop to the estate's network, thinking only to access the filing documents. She had inadvertently provided the perfect digital escape route for the evidence. The confession. I immediately downloaded the encrypted file and transferred it to my secure laptop. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, and the moment I pressed play, I heard the faint ambient hum of the estate office, followed by the familiar low whir of the desk lamp's fan. The first clip was Vivian on a private call about 2 hours after I had left. "Yes, Mr. Henderson, the probate packet is ready." Vivian's voice was sharp and clear. "James was here this morning. He's an emotional wreck, completely neutralized. He bought the story about the charitable intent hook, line, and sinker." Then the core of this conspiracy. "No, the original will is destroyed, of course. This one," she paused, a slight laugh escaping her, "is perfect. I had my friend Dr. Myers confirm that Eleanor's signature was medically difficult but authentic. The date is the key. It appears to be signed during her last lucid window." Dr. Myers. A name. A collaborator in the fraud. The forged will wasn't just a forgery, it was a medically backed deception. "I've initiated the first transfer," Vivian continued, her voice full of triumphant excitement. "I moved the investment portfolio into the foundation's holding account this afternoon, $12 million. It's done. Once the court validates the will next week, it's legally untouchable. The house will follow after probate." The blueprint for fraud. The recording was better than I could have hoped for. It wasn't just a confession, it was a detailed blueprint of the fraud. 1. Destruction of evidence. Vivian admitted to destroying the original will. 2. Collusion. She named Dr. Myers as an accomplice in authenticating the forged signature. 3. The crime. She confirmed the $12 million transfer had already been initiated. I paused the recording, my hands shaking. The quiet, benevolent aunt had not just stolen our money. She had committed major federal wire fraud and destroyed evidence, all while claiming moral superiority. Mobilizing the defense, I immediately called Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, the trap worked." I said, my voice tight with a cold clarity that only comes from absolute betrayal. "I have the full audio confession. She admitted the will is forged, that she destroyed the original, and named her accomplice Dr. Myers. She has already moved $12 million into her foundation's holding account." Marcus was silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the crime. "A voice recording is hard evidence, James. We move immediately. The $12 million transfer is the weak link. Wire fraud. We can't let her liquidate that money." "What's the first step?" "We file two things simultaneously tomorrow morning. First, a federal injunction and temporary restraining order (TRO) on the $12 million transfer, listing the Vivian Vance Charitable Foundation as the defendant. Second, we file a criminal complaint for fraud and embezzlement with the district attorney's office, using the audio as the primary evidence. We stop the money, and then we go for the arrest." I looked at the recording on my screen, the definitive proof of Vivian's greed captured, while she believed I was crying myself to sleep. She thought she had won with paperwork. She was about to lose everything to a silent listener hiding inside her favorite desk lamp. I didn't sleep that night. The audio confession, Vivian's cold, triumphant voice confirming the forgery, and the $12 million transfer played repeatedly in my mind. She was confident, she was aggressive, and she was moving fast. The emergency filing. The following morning, I met Marcus Thorne at the federal courthouse in Boston. We worked quickly, filing the two critical legal motions. 1. The temporary restraining order (TRO). Marcus filed an emergency injunction and TRO against the Vivian Vance Charitable Foundation and the specific bank where Vivian had moved the funds. We presented the audio recording, transcribed and authenticated by a forensics expert, as irrefutable proof of fraudulent activity and intent to commit wire fraud. 2. The criminal complaint. Concurrently, we filed a criminal complaint with the U.S. Attorney's Office, detailing the embezzlement, the forgery, and the destruction of the original will. Ms. Vivian Vance was officially a federal suspect. The federal judge, upon hearing the recording and seeing the immediate financial peril of the estate, granted the TRO within hours. The trap snaps shut. The court order went into effect instantly. Federal agents moved immediately to notify the bank holding the foundation's account. Vivian, completely oblivious and still operating under the assumption that I was incapacitated by grief, was likely planning her next move. The phone call that followed, relayed to me by Marcus, confirmed the trap had snapped shut. Vivian called the bank, attempting to authorize a small initial withdrawal, likely to cover her lawyer's retainer or some urgent charitable expenditure, testing the waters. The bank manager's response was final. Ms. Vance, all assets associated with the foundation's holding account are under a federal asset freeze pursuant to a temporary restraining order filed this morning. No transactions are permitted. The revelation. Vivian drove directly to Marcus's office, bypassing her own bewildered lawyer. Marcus described the scene. Vivian was disheveled, her composure shattered. This is insane. Marcus, on whose authority are you freezing my foundation's accounts? This is slander. James is clearly having a breakdown, making ridiculous accusations, she demanded, waving the notarized, revised will. Marcus calmly pointed to the audio transcript sitting on his desk. The order was granted based on evidence, Vivian. Evidence that includes your voice recorded yesterday afternoon in the estate office confirming the destruction of the original will, the use of a forged signature, and the wire fraud of $12 million. The name of the accomplice, Dr. Myers, was highlighted on the transcript. The absolute immediate panic that followed told Marcus everything he needed to know. She hadn't suspected a surveillance, she hadn't anticipated the speed of the federal courts, and she certainly hadn't imagined that the antique desk lamp she trusted would be listening. James is in no state to orchestrate this, Vivian stammered, attempting to maintain her lie. James took a day off to grieve, believing you were trustworthy, Marcus corrected. What James did was strategically place a voice-activated recorder inside the antique desk lamp you use every day. He knew your greed would force you to move the money and discuss the fraud while you thought you were alone. Vivian realized the depth of my deception, the cold, calculating nature of my countermove. Her nephew, the supposedly grieving wreck, had set a perfect, irrefutable trap. The immediate fallout. Vivian was forced to leave Marcus's office without her money, without her composure, and facing the U.S. Attorney's office. Marcus immediately informed me of the total victory. The money is safe, James. The probate filing is suspended, and the U.S. Attorney is preparing a search warrant for her foundation office. We have her on tape admitting to conspiracy, wire fraud, and destruction of evidence. She is completely boxed in. I looked at the recorder on my desk, the tiny piece of hardware that had saved my family's inheritance. I had successfully turned my feigned surrender into the ultimate legal weapon. Now, Marcus, I said, the grief replaced by quiet determination, let's go after Dr. Myers. The immediate freeze on the $12 million was a tactical victory, but to secure the criminal conviction and definitively invalidate the forged will, we needed to neutralize Vivian's accomplice, Dr. Myers. The foundation raid. The federal machinery moved swiftly. Armed with the audio evidence of conspiracy, and the TRO, the U.S. Attorney's Office secured a search warrant for the Vivian Vance Charitable Foundation's office. Marcus Thorne relayed the outcome to me that afternoon. They found a treasure trove, James. We have copies of the original legitimate will from your mother's files hidden inside Vivian's safe. She hadn't destroyed it yet. She was holding onto it as leverage, confirming her admission on the tape. The discovery of the original legitimate will was the final blow to Vivian's claim. The forged document was instantly rendered irrelevant. The doctor's role, the spotlight immediately swung to Dr. Myers, the person Vivian named on the tape as having provided the crucial medical authentication for the forged signature. This suggested a specific type of fraud designed to appear legitimate to the probate court by citing my mother's lucid window before her death. Marcus arranged a secret meeting with Dr. Myers, knowing the pressure of the federal investigation would be mounting. Dr. Myers is panicking, Marcus informed me. He's terrified of losing his medical license and facing federal conspiracy charges. He initially refused to meet, but when I played him the portion of the tape where Vivian names him, he agreed to cooperate fully. I insisted on attending the meeting. I wanted to look the accomplice in the eye. The confession of collusion. We met Dr. Myers in a secure conference room. He was a nervous man, sweating profusely under the weight of his imminent professional ruin. I didn't forge the signature, Dr. Myers pleaded, looking desperately at me. Vivian came to me with the revised will and said, your mother had signed it but was too frail to appear before a notary. She offered my foundation a massive donation, a 7-figure sum. I would simply write a dated letter stating that on that specific day, your mother was experiencing a cognitive peak and was fully capable of executing legal documents. He had authenticated the capacity of the testator, not the signature. It was a crime of medical ethics and conspiracy, not calligraphy. Vivian paid me $50,000 in cash up front. I wrote the letter thinking it was just a technicality for a large charitable gift. I didn't know the will was forged, he insisted, though his excuse was weak. Did you ever see the original will? I asked, my voice flat. No. Vivian told me she destroyed the old one right after this was signed. His testimony perfectly corroborated the audio evidence from the desk lamp. Marcus immediately secured a cooperation agreement. Dr. Myers would turn over all correspondence with Vivian, agree to testify against her at trial, and in return, the U.S. Attorney's Office would recommend leniency for his role in the conspiracy. His medical career was over, but he would avoid prison. The unassailable case. I walked out of the meeting feeling a deep sense of finality. The conspiracy was fully exposed, from the top-level theft Vivian down to the supporting medical fraud Dr. Myers. I had the audio confession, the desk lamp, the forged will, the central instrument of the crime, the original will, proof of intent to defraud, and the testimony of the accomplice confirming the premeditation. The case was absolutely airtight. Vivian thought she could hide her betrayal behind layers of legal complexity and medical jargon. She never anticipated that her grieving nephew would use a simple piece of home decor to expose her entire scheme. She thought she was untouchable, James, Marcus noted as we left the building. She never realized the antique lamp was recording the last words she needed to keep secret. She relied on our grief, Marcus, I replied, looking toward the sunset. And she relied on technology that couldn't fight back. I made sure this time the technology was listening. With Dr. Meyer's cooperation and the physical evidence of the two wills secured, the U.S. Attorney's Office moved to close the trap on Vivian. The criminal complaint was upgraded, and a warrant for her arrest was issued. The humiliation. The arrest was coordinated discreetly to avoid a media frenzy, yet the irony of the timing was poetic. Vivian was arrested at the courthouse, attempting to file a motion to challenge the federal asset freeze on her foundation's accounts. Marcus relayed the details to me. She was defiant right up until the marshals presented the warrant for wire fraud and conspiracy, he reported. They confiscated her phone, her laptop, and escorted her out of the building in handcuffs. She is currently being held without bail, considered a severe flight risk due to the amount of money involved. Vivian, who had always thrived on public image and social stature, was now facing the ultimate public humiliation. The benevolent philanthropist was exposed as a common criminal, reclaiming the estate. With Vivian detained and the original will recovered, the legal process of restoring the estate's legitimacy began immediately. Marcus filed a motion to admit the original will to probate and a petition to invalidate the forged will, citing the audio confession, Dr. Meyer's sworn testimony, and the physical evidence recovered from the foundation office. The probate court, presented with overwhelming evidence of fraud, quickly granted the motion. The result was immediate and profound. The $12 million transfer was legally reversed, and the funds were returned from the foundation's holding account back into the legitimate estate accounts. The Boston home, which Vivian had intended to convert into a foundation headquarters, was secured as estate property to be sold, and the proceeds split among the heirs. My siblings David and Chloe were formally reinstated as majority heirs, receiving their rightful equal shares. I called David and Chloe that evening to confirm the full reversal. "It's back, guys," I told them simply. "The house, the money, everything. She couldn't touch it. It was the desk lamp that saved us." Chloe broke into tears of relief. David, quiet but intensely grateful, simply said, "You saved us, James. She thought you were the weakest link, and you turned out to be the smartest." The silent witness. I took one final trip to the estate office, now secured by the court and awaiting inventory. I went straight to the mahogany desk. The antique desk lamp was sitting exactly where it had been, the light off. It was scheduled to be cataloged as physical evidence in the criminal trial, but its service was done. I paused, thinking about the quiet hours I spent installing that recorder, the shaky anticipation in the calf, and the cold relief of hearing the truth spill from Vivian's own mouth. The lamp wasn't just a recording device, it was the symbol of my competence. Vivian's fatal mistake was assuming that grief meant incapacity. She assumed I would fight a loud, emotional battle she could easily dismiss as the rantings of a broken man. Instead, I fought a silent war of logistics and technology, using her greed and her comfort in the familiar setting against her. I picked up the lamp carefully, a gesture of respect for the inanimate object that saved my family. "You served us well," I murmured to the hollowed-out base. I knew the criminal trial would be long and messy, but the core of the victory was already achieved. My mother's final wishes were honored, my siblings were secure, and the toxic shadow of Vivian's greed was permanently lifted from our lives. The inheritance was more than money. It was the restoration of our family's dignity, and it was all secured by a tiny microphone hidden in an old bronze base. Vivian's legal team, led by a ruthless defense attorney named Mr. Sterling, launched an immediate aggressive attack on the core of the prosecution's case, the audio recording from the desk lamp. With the original will and Dr. Meyer's testimony damning them, Mr. Sterling's only path was to destroy the recording's integrity. The motion to suppress. Mr. Sterling filed a motion to suppress the audio evidence, arguing two main points before the federal judge. 1. Illegal surveillance. He claimed that my secret recording violated Vivian's reasonable expectation of privacy, as the estate office was not a public place, rendering the evidence inadmissible under state and federal surveillance laws. 2. Lack of authenticity. He argued that the recording was unauthenticated, easily manipulated digital evidence, and that the voices could have been spliced or digitally altered to create a false confession. This hearing was critical. If the audio was suppressed, the prosecution would still have the forged will and Dr. Myers' testimony, but they would lose the direct, irrefutable confession of destruction of evidence and wire fraud. The forensic counter. Marcus Thorne was ready. He knew the surveillance argument was weak, as the recording was made by a party to the conversation, Vivian's lawyer, who was not present, but the conversation was about me, the injured party, and more importantly, the federal wire fraud charges superseded many state privacy laws. Marcus called the digital forensics expert who had initially handled the audio. The expert testified to the court. Integrity. We analyzed the file's metadata and ran advanced spectral analysis. The recording is a single continuous unedited audio stream. There are no signs of splicing, digital manipulation, or alteration. The voice. We compared the voice on the recording to hours of Ms. Vivian Vance's voice from public speeches and verified the vocal signature as hers. The source. The presence of ambient low-level fan noise and static unique to the antique desk lamp was verified in the recording, confirming the origin was the device found in the lamp base. The testimony meticulously dismantled the claim of forgery and confirmed that the recording captured the unfiltered real-time conspiracy. The judge's ruling. After listening to the testimony and reviewing the transcript alongside the original audio, Judge Thompson issued a definitive ruling. The defense's argument regarding the admissibility of this evidence is denied. The judge declared, the court finds that the recording, while obtained covertly, was secured by an immediate heir who had strong credible suspicion of fiduciary fraud and criminal activity. Given the immediacy of the wire fraud that was occurring concurrently with the recording, and the fact that the recording is the sole evidence of the destruction of the original will, the probative value outweighs the privacy claim. He continued, furthermore, the defense has failed to prove any material alteration or fabrication. The recording is deemed authentic and admissible in its entirety. The sound of the judge's gavel was the sound of the final nail in Vivian's coffin. Mr. Sterling's core defense strategy was neutralized by the objective, unblinking truth recorded by the desk lamp. Vivian's last performance. Vivian, who was attending the hearing via video link from the detention facility, looked devastated. When the camera briefly focused on her, she attempted one last performance. She began to cry, muttering about her grief and how her nephew was tearing apart the family, but the performance landed flat. The courtroom and the judge had just spent an hour listening to her cold clinical confession of wire fraud and forgery. Her tears were too late. I looked at the screen devoid of any sympathy. She thought she was fighting a family disagreement. She never realized she was fighting digital proof of a federal crime. I had anticipated her attempts to discredit the evidence, which is why I focused on an unedited, secure recording, the only kind of evidence that survives a challenge against a high-priced defense lawyer. The lamp didn't lie, and the forensics proved it. With the desk lamp recording confirmed as irrefutable evidence, the criminal trial for Vivian Vance began in earnest. The U.S. Attorney's Office presented a streamlined case focused on the wire fraud and conspiracy to defraud the heirs. This was the moment Vivian had to face the consequence of her betrayal in front of the family she tried to destroy. The heirs testify. My siblings David and Chloe were the first witnesses called. They weren't testifying about a complicated legal battle. They were testifying about trust and betrayal. David, usually reserved, spoke powerfully about the immediate aftermath of Mother's death. Vivian presented herself as our savior, the family member who would handle the tedious paperwork. He testified, looking directly at Vivian, who sat stony-faced at the defense table. When she presented the revised will, she said it was Mother's final charitable wish. We believed her because she was family. We trusted her completely. Chloe, more emotional, testified to the devastating impact of the fraud. It wasn't just the money. It was the feeling that someone we loved had taken advantage of our grief. James was destroyed by it. We felt helpless until he told us he had a plan. Their testimony established the emotional foundation. The defendants were grieving, vulnerable, and relying entirely on the fiduciary duty of their aunt. The centerpiece. The prosecution's climax was the playback of the audio recording. The courtroom was prepared with professional speakers to ensure every word was crystal clear. The jury listened to the entire conversation, Vivian's triumphant tone, her casual admission of destroying the original will, and the crucial line confirming the transfer of $12 million into the foundation's holding account. When the clip ended, the silence in the courtroom was heavy. The judge allowed a brief pause for the jury to process the raw, unedited confession. Then Marcus Thorne took the stand and simply authenticated the transcript, confirming that the audio led directly to the filing of the TRO, which successfully froze the stolen funds, proving the confession was not speculative, but documented fact. The defense's shift Mr. Sterling Vivian's lawyer was forced to execute a tactical retreat. He could no longer deny the crime. He could only argue for intent and mitigation. During cross-examination, he tried to paint me as an aggressive, manipulative person who set up a trap for a relative simply trying to honor a misunderstood charitable donation. Mr. Vance Sterling challenged me. You admit that you faked a breakdown, lied about your grief, and deliberately planted a recording device to catch your aunt in a private setting, correct? I admit that I confirmed my aunt was committing multi-million-dollar wire fraud and conspiracy. I corrected him, maintaining absolute composure. I used the one tool at my disposal to secure irrefutable evidence before she could liquidate the assets. My actions were not deceitful, Mr. Sterling. They were protective. I was protecting my mother's wishes, my siblings' future, and my family's trust fund. But you betrayed your aunt's trust. My aunt betrayed my entire family's trust when she destroyed my mother's will. She forced me to fight a criminal with the tools of evidence and law. I chose to fight silently because a desperate thief is most honest when they think they are alone. The final look. The testimony was devastating. I stepped down from the stand, and as I walked past the defense table, I met Vivian's eyes. She was defeated, her earlier defiance replaced by cold, hard realization. She had gambled everything on my emotional fragility and lost to a piece of strategic code and an antique desk lamp. The trial was heading for its inevitable conclusion. The evidence of the audio recording was simply too powerful for any plea of misunderstanding or mitigation to overcome. The jury retired to deliberate following the closing arguments. The prosecutor, Ms. Rodriguez, had powerfully utilized the voice recording, arguing that the desk lamp served as a clear, objective witness to premeditated felony. Mr. Sterling's final plea for leniency, focusing on Vivian's charitable history, was drowned out by her own voice confirming the destruction of the original will. The verdict. The jury returned in just 4 hours. My siblings David and Chloe sat with me as we waited for the verdict. The tension was palpable, but beneath it I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth, regardless of the outcome, was already known. The foreman stood. In the matter of the United States versus Vivian Vance on the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of conspiracy to defraud heirs, we find the defendant guilty. Vivian's reaction was minimal, a sharp inhale quickly controlled. She looked utterly diminished, the power and arrogance that had defined her entire life stripped away by a simple legal decree. Sentencing and restitution. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. Marcus Thorne immediately filed the necessary documents to ensure maximum financial damage to Vivian, seeking not just the return of the stolen money, which was already frozen, but also extensive punitive damages. The judge, citing the overwhelming evidence of betrayal of family trust and the calculated nature of the fraud against grieving heirs, delivered a severe sentence, 15 years in federal prison. Furthermore, the judge ordered full restitution to the estate and critically mandated that the Vivian Vance Charitable Foundation be subjected to a full federal investigation for its use as a shell organization in the attempted fraud, effectively ensuring the closure and dissolution of the organization that was the ultimate object of Vivian's greed. The judge's final words to Vivian were piercing. You sought to justify theft through the veneer of philanthropy. You attempted to destroy your deceased sister's final wishes. The consequences are now absolute. The healing of the family. The legal battles were over, but the emotional work remained. David, Chloe, and I met in the now quiet estate office, sitting around the very desk where the initial betrayal had occurred. The antique desk lamp, having been released by the court as evidence, was back on the desk, its base now clearly marked by the federal evidence tag. It feels surreal, Chloe admitted, running her hand over the desk surface. The money is back, but I keep thinking about how close she came. If you hadn't faked that breakdown, James. She was banking on the psychological impact of grief, I explained. She saw our sadness as weakness. I realized the only way to beat a premeditated, documented lie was with an unassailable, documented truth. I looked at the lamp. The desk lamp didn't care about our feelings or her reputation. It only cared about sound waves. It saved us not by fighting, but by listening. We agreed to sell the Boston home as per Mother's original legitimate will. The proceeds would be split equally, allowing us all to move forward with the clean, honest inheritance Mother intended. The true legacy. We decided to keep one item from the estate, the antique desk lamp. It was not kept as a trophy, but as a permanent, tangible symbol of the power of vigilance and the fact that we fought and won together. My mother's true legacy was not just the money, it was the love and trust that Vivian tried and failed to sever. We had survived the betrayal, not because of legal maneuvering, but because one of us was willing to risk everything to uncover the truth, armed only with a small, hidden microphone. With Vivian serving her sentence, the focus shifted from the courthouse back to the complex, tedious process of unwinding her financial mess and formally dissolving the fraudulent organization she used, the Vivian Vance Charitable Foundation. The foundation's collapse. The federal investigation mandated the complete closure of the foundation. Marcus Thorne and his team were appointed to oversee the liquidation of its assets. This was a critical step as Vivian had convinced several legitimate unaware donors